Back in 2019, Stonemaier released their version of a Civilization game titled Tapestry. If you want to know more about that one, we actually did reviews on those, so you can check those out. But in this video, we're going to actually be talking about their final expansion, Fantasies and Futures. The idea here is that there are alternate realities, be it with advanced technology or even magical creatures, that will be affecting and changing your Tapestry game. They even go so far as to say that every Tapestry game is just an alternate reality of our own history. So let's see how this may alter your games in this expansion review. So before we get into the new mechanics from Fantasies and Futures, let's quickly go over the just more of stuff they added, mainly the civilizations and capital city mats. So here are all the new civilizations added, and they sort of have a trend, as you can see, a bit more fantasy related or just magic in general. The few I want to point out are, first off, the Elder Ones and Merfolk allow you to actually sort of, in essence, keep playing after that 5th income turn, which I wasn't a big fan of, as it pretty much usually led to 1 or maybe 2, depending if both of them are being used, extending the game length as you're just waiting for them to take their turn. Yes, this game can have people ending at different times, but usually if you're all around the same skill and power level, you tend to end in very similar turns, give or take maybe another round or 2. While these guys pretty much just add a whole new segment. But there are plenty of other powers too, each one with their own unique twists. I find the Wee Folk and Celestials being very silly ones, adding their cubes into places where they shouldn't be, such as other people's maps or the central board. The Werefolk are probably my favorite of the bunch in terms of just being fun, but the two I do want to point out in terms of I think that would impact future games are the Genie and Illuminati. This is because I feel like they add a lot more player interaction. The Genie will choose a random opponent at the start of each of their income turns, and that player is going to choose one of these circle bonuses, all victory point rewards, to gain. The Genie then will not only gain the circle benefit, but also one of these square benefits adjacent to the circle benefit chosen. This made things very interesting, I feel, for both the Genie trying to maybe stack things up, so if a certain player was chosen, they would get a good amount of points as well, while the other players would have to think, well, I don't really want the Genie to roll the science die, but I don't really have a lot of conquered lands or those kinds of lands, for example. So a much more interesting keeping track of each other, trying to make sure that one side gets the better deal than the other. The Illuminati, though, definitely add a whole new form of control and interaction, mainly making a lot of people sort of annoyed at the Illuminati player. You see, at the start of the game, they're going to have all the dice placed onto their mat. If an opponent ever needs to roll the die and it's on the mat, they still take it and roll it, but the Illuminati now gets the same bonus in addition to the opponents. If it's the red and black die, they actually get both bonuses, which is really powerful. Afterwards, though, they are not returned to the mat until the Illuminati has to roll those dice, in which case, anytime he rolls them, they will return to the mat. This makes a back and forth of maybe waiting to do your conquest until someone else doesn't conquest, so everyone rolls them without the Illuminati constantly getting more points. While the Illuminati, on the other hand, are probably going to set up their tracks so that as soon as someone rolls the die, they can roll it right afterwards in order to return to the mat and force other people to continue giving them bonuses. But then, there is one other thing that makes things very annoying for players, and that's if, let's say, people try to avoid rolling the dice. Well, at the start of each of their income, they're going to gain 6 victory points for each die still on their mat, then returning all dice to their mat regardless. It really creates this back and forth play. I don't know if they're powerful or not, but the Illuminati being in a game really caused a lot of people to try and mess or plan their effects in accordance to trying to give the Illuminati as little power as possible, with usually the Illuminati laughing all the way as they got a bunch of extra rewards. Next, we have the new capital maps. The city in Bottle is definitely a bit of a weird one, and you don't put landmarks there, so you technically probably have the same amount of squares, but it's definitely one that always makes me a little bit worried that I need to be playing more optimal. The Veil is interesting, but I wouldn't say it's anything like too crazy compared to other advanced ones. Same thing with the Quagmire. The Polar and Netherworld are both similar in the sense that you're not going to be blocking up Tetrises as much. You're just going to be making a line. The Netherworld wants you to connect there to there to there to get complete districts, while the Polar wants you to cover up these blue circles. I did find the Netherworld to be a bit easier compared to Polar. Polar tended to be a bit harder for me to wrap my head around in terms of how to optimally place things. The Savannah one here, I feel, was really powerful, or maybe just in specific situations. For the way it works is it has districts like any of the other ones, but when you complete a district, instead of getting the points for it, you will get an extra income on a later turn. So usually at max, you can get 9 income from completing a district because there's usually 9 districts. The Savannah one, on the other hand, if you're able to complete even some of these districts very early on, you can easily bring in more than 9 resources. It requires a really strong early game, but if you're able to complete even 1 or 2 of those early on, then you're going to do very well when it comes to the late game. So now let's actually get to the real new mechanics added in this expansion. Now here's a setup for a player, and those of you who are sharp-eyed may have already noticed the new component added. You now will tuck a card with that 5 symbol underneath your board like so, and that is to indicate the new reserve mechanic as well as the new rules added for the 5th income turn. Throughout the game, though for the most part I believe they're mostly in the Tapestry cards, when you play a card, it may refer to you to place a resource, like a building for this card, into a reserve on the right of your income mat. There it will stay until the 5th income phase, where usually you trigger just your civilization and upgrade some tech and get your final victory points. Before upgrading, you're going to place anything reserved here onto the board. It can be plenty of different resources, not just buildings to place onto your capital city. You will do this regardless of whether the Tapestry card that initially put that object there is still out or has been covered or turned face over from other game effects. Now let's zoom in on the Tapestry cards. You may notice these 2 little boxes there. That's another new mechanic known as Charmed. The idea is these are Tapestry cards that have been affected or charmed by parallel universes. When that card is placed next to another Tapestry, whether it has a charm symbol or not, you will get that bonus. So for example, placing this here would not give us that bonus, but as soon as we place the Tapestry card on this side of it, we would gain that bonus. They aren't always both-sided. Some can have on just the right or left, meaning you'd probably want to play cards with those on the right as your first Tapestry, with the doubles in the middle, and finally the ones pointing to the left as your last one. Of course, like I said, you don't need to have a charm next to a charmed. You could easily just as have this scenario and still get all the charm bonuses. They are also important for some of the tech cards as well introduced here, as many of them require you either have a charmed Tapestry card on your board or not until the 5th income phase where you can actually fully upgrade it. There are also some of them like these 2 here, which after being used at the top bonus are flipped over, meaning you cannot use other powers that would give you a second square bonus from these, as they're usually too strong. Now, before I get into the grading, there's one other thing I want to talk about that I think is important when it comes to especially something like a final expansion here, and that is these 3 books. Now, they are actually a rewrite and culmination of all the rule sets, mainly the regular rules, the solo play, and the Shadow Kingdom, which is really specifically for 2-player, but is also used in the solo play. This is obviously makes sense for the final expansion to have a new rulebook. In particular, if you've ever gotten any of the previous expansions for Tapestry, there have been obviously there are new mechanics, but maybe changes to some of mostly previous civilizations where they may tweak them to make them stronger or weaker depending on player feedback. This does include all of those here listed in one place, I believe, yes, right on the back right here, as well as some alternate rules that point out maybe things that help or people complained about, like, for example, of some tech cards that apparently are a bit too strong. But of course, we'll see if there needs to be some addendums for the components added from this expansion. Now, when it comes to playing this expansion, it does add technically some new rules mechanics, but for the most part, this does just feel like most of the same. Yes, the charm things add some interesting choices to where you're going to place your Tapestry cards, but really you sort of already were doing that. You had to think, well, this is a better one early on, or this one I want to wait until I build up myself on a certain track. So while you are getting bonuses for making sure to play those Tapestries in specific slots, it's not something that I think is actually changing the way you play the game and your strategies. It's just giving you a little bit more depending on how you play those cards. Now, the 5th income slot is sort of a nice bonus, but really just feels like adding and making sure that there's more going on, that fifth income thing. And the tech cards as well, same thing. It's just cool new tech cards. They're not bad. It's not like the art board, which I really felt like added a whole new layer of something for you to interact and mess around with. Same thing for when I was talking about earlier with the new capital mats as well as civilizations. I'm not trying to be disappointed or say this expansion is boring and doesn't add anything really fun or new. It's really more along the lines of, well, if I were to just look at the mechanics and compare it to my great, wait, or hate scale of expansions, this one would probably, for me, definitely go more towards the wait side. It's got some fun stuff, and I do really like the civilizations. I think they are probably the most exciting thing I had in the whole thing. And I mean, the tapestries are always cool and stuff, but it's definitely one that I could wait behind the other ones. But because this is the final one, that means we have this rulebook here. And that's what actually is sort of the thing for me that pushes it up. Yes, you probably can get a comprehensive rewritten rulebook online, but I'm someone who really prefers to have a paper book to look through for something like that, not having to take out my phone, and having something that lists all the rules for all the other expansions on here and being able to make sure like this is how you sort the game. And the rulebook is written very well. If there's something that pertains to a specific expansion, they always make sure to put, for example, FF for Fantasies and Future in there. So you know, for example, if there's a setup step that is only used for that expansion, you only pertain to that if you have that expansion. So that is alone is going to help push this up a bit, because I could see both if you're like me, for example, who this is technically the final expansion for this game, where this is really nice to have this all sum up. And of course, new parts were always fun to have more things to throw into the deck. But I could also see that if you are just the base game and you're looking for your first expansion, this still might be the one you want to buy. The game components themselves, I don't think will be too backbreaking in terms of learning the new stuff. Like I said, they sort of already are mechanics you are going to be trying to master and learn throughout playing the game. But it also gives you a full rule book. So you now can make sure that if, for example, you feel like a civilization is a little broken, you got that there. As well as you need to deal with like, oh, I don't know about this doesn't feel good. And you look in the rulebook, and if you do see, according to this expansion actually has something that might answer my question, because I was like, oh, that adds a whole new track, or this adds this, which maybe helps you decide what should happen next. So this definitely moves up a little bit. And truthfully, it is actually, I think, what should be a good final expansion. It's definitely something that should be considered as either your first or final expansion. But that will be up to you to decide. Do you feel that this expansion had enough, or did you feel like it should have included more? Are you fine with this being the final expansion, or are you disappointed that there weren't more tracks added, or some other major issue that you feel like could have been a great addition to Tapestry? You can let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this, and thank you so much for watching. And of course, the usual like, share, subscribe. You're going to hear from every YouTuber, but it is always helpful. So whether it's for me in this video or someone else you watch, greatly appreciate it if you do it for us. But for now, that's the end of this. For everyone on Patreon, thank you so much for your support. You are all high rollers and the best and leading to the greatest civilizations out there for your generosity. But for now, I'm Will, and this has been an Expansion Review.